from the library. I know we ran out of time during the orientation last week, and I wasn't able to finish taking you through the process of searching in CINAHL. So I'm recording this video for you so that you can just see the entire process of using the PICO method in the database to find answers to your clinical and research questions. While I'm doing this in CINAHL, just know that the same basic process can also be used in PubMed, which is one of the other most used medical databases available to you for your Master of Nursing program here at OHSU. The main difference is that CINAHL is focused on nursing, while PubMed houses more general medical research articles. CINAHL stands for the Cumulative Index for Nursing and Allied Health Literature, and it's one of the main places that you'll be going to look for articles, so that's why we're looking at it today. So let's start. First, I think it's helpful to think about background and foreground questions and what functions they serve. If we think about this through the lens of learning, what you're really doing when you ask a background question is learning basic information about your topic, which will give you a more broad base of knowledge that you can then use to narrow your questions down into a more specific foreground question, and that's what PICO is for. When you think about your foreground questions, in the evidence-based practice model, what we're doing is finding and assessing the best, most relevant, and timely information to help us make decisions. So foreground questions are by nature going to be much more focused on a specific problem. And if we think about the pyramid of medical evidence, we can look at what kinds of articles and research designs are going to have the most authoritative information to answer our question. A lot of times these are going to be those kinds of gold standard, high quality systematic reviews or meta-analysis articles that are based on those systematic reviews up there in the top section of the pyramid under appraised and filtered. Rather than something with lower quality evidence like, as we go down into the unfiltered section, those at the bottom, those expert opinion articles. You can definitely use CINAHL and PubMed to filter for all of these different kinds of publication types. It's always a good idea to try to start by looking for the highest quality types available in the databases, and I will show you how to do that here at the end. So these background and foreground kinds of questions really serve two different but very important functions for you in your research process and are just a good way to kind of conceptualize where you'll want to be looking along the spectrum using different kinds of resources to find your answers. One of the main things that you'll learn as you're doing research is which tools to use for which questions. And thinking in those terms of background and foreground questions can help you do that. So for background questions, we might use medical encyclopedias from the library or a database like Access Medicine, which is really like an online bookshelf of core titles in ebook format. We might also use a drug database like Micromedics or Lexicomp, or a book like Davis's Drug Guide, which we have through our library catalog. We could also look at a basic point of care tool like UpToDate or ClinicKey for nursing. These tools all address that kind of basic background knowledge question. For foreground questions, we're going to want to use a database that has the research articles in it, such as our CINAHLs, our PubMeds, Cochrane systematic reviews. For information about articles about the field of education, you might look at ERIC. And for a broader band of knowledge fields, you could look in a database like Scopus. So we're going to get into developing a question in PICO in a minute. But first, it's worth thinking about why we want to spend time doing that right here at the beginning, rather than just doing a quick Google-like search and hoping it spits out the right answer. There's so much information out there that what we are doing with research is really like looking for that needle in the haystack when that haystack has millions and millions of pieces of information in it. Developing a good question helps us find articles that are relevant to our specific information or clinical need, but it also helps us with the actual searchability of that need. It's important to realize that those foreground databases don't use natural language searching like Google search. In order to use them effectively, we really need to find the most relevant keywords and subject terms. So that's why we go through this process and what the PICO model is all about. All right, PICO time. You're all going to get really familiar with this acronym if you don't already know it. It's just a tool that we use all the time in medical research that helps helps us break our question down into its component concepts. In database searching, this kind of concept breakdown is by far the most useful way to find the specific evidence that we need for practice. So PICO stands for patient or population group, or subtypes problem. I, intervention, that's the intervention that we need information about, which could be a prognostic factor, an exposure, a particular therapy or drug. The comparison, so what are we comparing our intervention against? Oftentimes the comparison will be a best practice, but sometimes it could be a second drug or therapy. And it's worth noting that sometimes, especially if the I part, the intervention we are looking for, is itself a best practice, we might not even need to include a comparison in our question. Finally, outcome. What are we hoping to accomplish or improve? I should also say that sometimes researchers add a T at the end of PICO, which stands for time, and if the question includes a specific time frame, that's when we'd want to do that. But for the example we're going to do today, we aren't going to be using the time piece. Okay, so here's a practice question. Intervention best practices. We have our 3 searchable concepts using PICO. The next thing we want to do is figure out some keywords for each of those concepts and plug them into the database. Those keywords are just the natural language words or phrases that we'd associate with our concept. We want to go through our concepts one at a time for this, and what we ultimately want to do is figure out what the database's way of cataloging that concept is. So that way that they do that is called a subject term. And in CINAHL, that system is called MESH, and it stands for Medical Subject Headings. And it comes from PubMed and the National Library of Medicine. CINAHL, in its cataloging, has just added some extra nursing-specific subject terms to the existing MESH system. So slightly different, but very, very, very similar. You want to find your subject terms for your concepts because authors will often use a lot of different words when writing their articles. The goal of having a subject term is that it will cover all of those different author synonyms for each concept, so that even if you aren't able to find all of the keywords that could possibly be used for what you're searching for, if you find that big umbrella subject term for the concept, you will get the most search results back and not miss as much. So we can use central lines as an example. The actual MESH term for this concept is central venous catheter. If we search for that MESH term, we should find all of our articles that are about central lines. And that's the aboutness is really what the subject terms are trying to get at, the aboutness. It's important to also add in our keywords to this too. So there are a couple of reasons for this. One of them is that it takes catalogers some time to add MESH terms to the articles as they're coming into the database, and many, many, many articles are coming into these databases all the time. If we want our best results for our searches, we always want to search for our keywords and our subject terms together. That's the best practice for searching in databases. So how do we do that? Well, this is the part that a lot of people find to be the hardest in this process. What we need to do is we need to try to generate a number of really good keywords for each concept. So let's just start with population. In this one, hospitalized adults with central lines, because later in the database we can actually filter for the age of our patients. For our best practices, this is a little bit harder. Some keywords that might get us to best practices might be guideline, protocol, management, and you might even come up with other kinds of keywords that might get us to the same information, but we're really trying to just use these keywords to get ourselves to our MESH terms. So we're going to try these ones. Again, no comparison for this one since we're just looking for best practices. And for our outcome, preventing central line bloodstream infections. So we could say central line infection, possibly CLABSI, and go from there. Okay, now we need to go into the database and find what the subject terms that cover our keyword concepts that we just generated are. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second, but first there's one last thing that you need to know. This is called Boolean searching, and I'm sure that some of you are familiar with it, but just to go over it one more time, it really is a key way that searching in databases work. So the logic here is that you can use ands and or, always capitalized in the database, so capital A-N-D or capital O-R, to tell it that you are looking for keywords together or separately. So in this case, on the slide, if I wanted to look for articles that are about masks or gloves, it would broaden my search and bring me results from articles that had either of those concepts. So more results, all of the blue, all the gloves, all the masks, and all in between. If I'm looking for articles that have both of those concepts, both masks and gloves, the database, if I search with and, capital A-N-D, will give me articles with both of those ideas, both of those concepts, and therefore I'll have fewer results, just the middle of that Venn diagram. So this really is a key concept in database searching. Those keywords that we just generated for each concept in our PICO question, we're going to use or with each of those groups because we want to get a broad group of articles about each concept, so a broader search for the concept. We will be ORing in our subject terms with each concept as well after we find them. Then at the end, we will AND each concept search together to find that sweet spot in the middle of the Venn diagram of all three of our concepts for that question. So let's go into the database and see how that works. I'm just going to hop out of my slides and come over to the database here real quick. If you remember, to get to our databases library, you can go there alphabetically here in collections and databases, or we have these quick links at the bottom, database, and we are going to go into CINAHL. Okay. So the first thing to know is I'm searching in CINAHL itself right here. And if I want to do my first search for our patient group, we had figured out that it was going to be central catheter or central venous catheter. And what I can do is go ahead and just punch it in like this. So you remember I was saying capitalize or, and I'm putting my two terms, are actually phrases. So I want to put those in quotation marks so it's looking for the whole phrase, just like that. And then I can go ahead and run the search. Now I, at this point, am just looking for, keywords. Hopefully we'll get it to work here. There we go. I am not sure what that was about. I tried the search, it just kind of messed up. Okay, so central catheter or central venous catheter. I can view the results. I've got 5,256. All these articles are going to have those phrases in them somewhere. And that's pretty good, but I also, like I said before, I want to figure out what the actual subject term for these is as well. And the way that I can do that is I can ask it to suggest subject terms here. And now I'm actually going to be searching in its mesh system that's got those extra terms added on. Peripherally inserted, central venous, catheterization, probably central venous catheters. If I'm curious to make sure it's the right one, I can look at the scope. And this does look like what I'm looking for. So the other thing that I might want to do is I might want to click on, I could click on the box here to add it to my search. Or what I might want to do is I might want to click on the term itself. All of these terms live in a hierarchy, and these are sort of like branches on a tree, smaller branches coming off each one. If I want peripherally inserted central catheters as well, it lives under central venous catheters. What I can do to include that one is I can explode it. This is basically like I'm cutting the branch off right here at central venous catheters, and all the little other branches that are attached to it are also going to be included in my search if I explode it. If I don't, I'm going to get central venous, but not the peripheral ones. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that. These subject headings can also help to narrow things down. Say I was looking for something specifically about ethical issues with central venous catheters. I could do that, but I always say at the beginning of these searches, it's best to stay broader. So it automatically includes all of these subject headings, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So I've basically kind of got it like in my Amazon shopping cart right now. I can search the database. That hops me back in, and I can see I'm in a search history screen right now. It'll remember all of the searches that I've done so far, as long as I'm still in this results list. And now I can view the results on either of them. What I actually want to do is I want to have all of the keyword terms and the subject terms searched with or. That way I'm making sure I'm not missing anything, right? This is the Venn diagram where I'm getting all the medical subject headings and all the keywords with or. So that's going to broaden my search. Okay, so there was some overlap. This one had 5,000, this one had 4,500. Now there's almost 7,000 with both of those two things. That's a pretty good search for my first concept. The next thing I want to do is I want to get my second concept, which was we thought guidelines or protocol or management. I'm also going to just put in best practices in quotes, because why not? Let's go ahead and do that. Okay. I'm not going to suggest subject terms first. I'm just going to run it. 905,000. Huge results list. Let's see what happens if we go ahead and suggest subject terms and see if it gets us anywhere that we want to be. Practice guidelines. That's not quite right. Do not confuse with standards of practice, which are authoritative statements that describe standards of care. Okay, well maybe we want to look for that instead. Let's try it. Let's go back to our basic search. Let's try the standards of practice one. Again, putting them in quotation marks. So this is nice to actually see. Sometimes this doesn't work the way we want it. Let's see what happens if we search for it as a keyword phrase. $2,822. One thing that we can do after we've entered our keywords, we can also see how the individual articles have been cataloged with different subjects. So if I find one that looks about right, which I'm kind of doing right now, so clinical, practice of standards, I can see from the way things are cataloged, sometimes I can use that to find professional standards. And I can bounce back and forth and just keep trying to find a subject term that actually works. But like I told you before, finding those guidelines, protocols, best practices, it's going to take us a while to zero in on the right actual subject terms. One other one that we could look at and that actually happen to know is the right one is clinical protocols. And normally I would just sort of bounce my way to it, but for now, because I don't want to have this video be too long, we want to find clinical protocols. in this case, it's probably nursing protocols. That looks about right. Okay. Let's just see where that lives in the hierarchy again. And I think what I want to do is probably go ahead and explode that. Okay, so searching the database, 6,777 protocols. And you know, I think I'm going to include the standards of practice and this guideline protocol management or best practices all together for this big second concept. Search with OR. Okay, 911,000, so still a lot. Then I've finally got line infection or CLABSI. I'm going to include sepsis as well. That was something that somebody else suggested in another class. Go ahead and run it. So still looking for my keywords. And let's see if I can find a subject term just off of that without even going back in. Sepsis. Sepsis brought up a lot. Not right away. Let's go back up and search it again, but this time going again back into the subject terms. Central nervous system. So central line infection didn't quite get us there. Let's try it one more time. I'm going to do this just with central line infection. Nope. We're going to hop back as a keyword search. See if I can find it without that sepsis piece. So just 170. And catheter-related bloodstream infections. I think that's what we want. Let's try it again. Now I know this is taking a little while, but it's good to realize, just seeing it demonstrated, that this is actually kind of what these searches actually look like. You're going to be spending a little bit of time on each concept. I'm going to do all of these for catheter-related infections, explode it, and search. The database for my subject term, 7,000. And then I'm just going to put them all together. So I'll search, whoops, that was wrong. That was searching with and. I wanted to search with or. So let me try those three again with or. Okay, 41 grand. So that was the search with or. Now I've got each one of my three concepts, my P, my I, and my O. So let's go ahead and put them together. We're searching with and now. So patients group was this one with the central venous catheters. The second one were my standards of practice, nursing protocols, guidelines, best practices. And my third one, catheter-related infections, central line infections, CLABSI, sepsis. Now I search with and. So this gets me to the middle of the Venn diagram and finds me articles that are about all three of those concepts. And I have 650 results that are all going to show up down here. And then what I can do, you remember I was showing you talking about the filters that I might use at the end. So I can take this down a bit. One is age, so that's my patient population. I can say all adults. So that'll take care of the pediatric part. Okay, took me down quite a few. The other thing I could do is I can filter for the publication date. Maybe I want stuff that's a little closer to current. So let's just say the last 10 years. On that sliding bar, I can change that. I'm down to 87. Now, the last thing that I might want to do is I might want to look for those systematic reviews and meta-analysis, the stuff at the very top of the pyramid that's going to review the randomized control trials and get us to stuff that may be a little bit more useful right at the beginning. We could always go through and look at each one of these 87 articles individually, but for us at the start, starting with the best information that we can is always a better plan. So I can get to those by clicking edit, and then it allows me under publication type, alphabetically, I can go down and find systematic review. And if I apply that, I'll go from those 87 articles down to 29. So these are 29 articles about all three of our concepts that are all systematic reviews. And hopefully somewhere within this list, I'll find something really good. Here we go. Knowledge of guidelines for preventing catheter-related bloodstream infections. Risk factors for central line-associated bloodstream infections. Okay, so this is the way that you're going to want to search the database in CINAHL and in PubMed by putting the concepts together separately, ORing in your keywords, finding your mesh terms, ORing those together, and then at the end you're going to AND together all three of your, or all four, however many concepts you have, and then you can filter. Okay. And let's go ahead and go forward. Oop. So the last thing that you'd want to do when you're in the database is you want to document your work. You can use EndNote, you can use Zotero, you can use really whatever system you want, but it's really important that once you've gone through this whole process, you save it. The way that you can do that is you really would have wanted to sign in at the beginning, which I forgot to show you, but let me go ahead and sign in right now. All right. So now that I've got that and I'm signed in, I can save my search. I'll want to name it something specific probably. I would call it, I'll just call it central line. It's probably good to put a date on there in case you run the search again and modify it. And save that search permanently. You can save it for 24 hours if you want, but if you save it permanently, you'll have it for whenever you need it again. So let's just go ahead and save that. Okay. Great. And now under my folders, I can go in and retrieve that search whenever I want to. Now, if I want to look at the results again, I just rerun it. Okay, there are my 29 results. One other place to look up here at the top, this that says share. And I can email myself a link so that I can download all of those results. So I'll just put in my email. And now I'll be able to download those and then put them into something like Zotero or EndNote. So I would put it into something under my searches in Zotero, and I would get that from my email, which is right here. Okay, so there's where I can download. All right, so just so you have it, here's my last slide. This gives you